and Representative Cheetah.
Dan, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having the opportunity to share a little bit of time together. My passion about this is very simple. In the 1920s, the organized crime rackets in the United States realized that if you hijack the judiciary, you don't need anything else, because if there's no place where the public can go to address their concerns and seek redress for abuses, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter what the executive or legislative branch is doing. If there's no redress, the public has no voice. And the fact of the matter is that this has been an organized crime syndicate since Anthony Fauci took over in 1984. Since he took over NIAID, he has taken $191 billion of U.S. taxpayer money. He's funded it into his market allocated, in violation of the Sherman and the Clayton Act. He has funded it into his market allocated selected targets. He has picked the winners and losers in violation of antitrust laws in the United States and in violation of competitiveness laws all over the world. He has picked the winners and losers. He's appropriated funds. He has used funds to fund domestic terrorism as defined under Section 802 of the Patriot Act. He has done everything he can to not only destroy what is in fact the fabric of America, but it goes further. He served as an interlocking director, and that's a very important term. That comes out of the 1911 and 1912 period of the investigations into the insurance and banking cabals that ran the United States back at the turn of the last century. Prior to the formation of the Federal Reserve, we had the Peugeot Committee. We had a number of investigations into interlocking directorates. And Anthony Fauci sat on a board with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and with the Chinese Center for Disease Control. And in September of 2019, he made the statement that there was going to be, between September 2019 and September 20, a global exercise in the release of a respiratory pathogen, solely for the purpose of preparing a universal vaccine platform. This is actually not my hypothesis. This is actually published information. And if you go back and you ask the question, well, how did he do that? How did he get prepared for that? You go back to 2015 to the National Academy of Sciences. Peter Daszak, the money launderer in chief, moving money from the United States through EcoHealth Alliance to the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Chinese Center for Disease Control, in 2015 made the statement, and I quote, "We need the public to accept a medical countermeasure for a pan-coronavirus vaccine. We need the media to create the hype, and we need to use that hype to our advantage. Investors will follow if they see profit at the end of the process." That, my friends, is a quote from the person who architected this particular pandemic. And we sit here and pretend like the criminals are actually innocently doing their best to try to serve the public interest. This is willful homicide, and no law enforcement agency anywhere in this country is willing to stand up and actually defend the citizens of this country against willful homicide. You know, here's the point. We used to have AGs get together on things like tobacco settlements, and we used to have AGs get together on things like opioid crisis, and we used to have AGs get together on pathetic efforts like Microsoft and Google and Facebook, when we were worried about the price fixing for search engine optimization or whatever else. This is homicide. And not a single law enforcement agent in this country is willing to accept that when Pfizer, in its own published documents, says the following sentence: the deaths are within normal expected range. If we had an automotive manufacturer, right? If we had an automotive manufacturer who let a car on the highway and we said that, well, you know what, brakes work most of the time, but they don't work all the time, and we're willing to accept the within normal range of highway accidents, do you think that there's any AG in this country who would be willing to stand by and go, yeah, let's go ahead and let those trucks on the road? Of course not. But we have no one who is willing to actually look at the published evidence. These are not allegations. This is the perpetrators with their own published statements. And we are unwilling to have a single member of the legislative, executive, or judicial branch of this government in any state or at the federal level who is willing to say we are committing homicide and we are doing nothing. Nothing. There has never been a preponderance of evidence that has showed that there's a novel virus. That was made by a committee who had self-interest. The ICTV, which is the International Committee on the Taxonomy of Viruses, who said that SARS was a novel virus, all of them were funded by the agencies that were complicit in creating this. There was not an independent person on that entire board. So the virus as novel was nothing more than an inside job. The designation of COVID-19, which was 11 clinical symptoms that are associated with influenza and pneumonia and other respiratory diseases, was never a disease. It is a catch-all of a series of clinical presentations, and it was done to mask influenza out of existence because, as you know, we had no influenza last year. The entirety of this thing was an organized criminal conspiracy, and not one law enforcement entity anywhere on earth and not one legislative body anywhere on earth is willing to stand up for the oath that they took to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Guess what? We have enemies, foreign and domestic. And they have admitted to their crimes in public, and we stand idly by while we see humanity die.
Boy, that's a powerful statement, David. Incidentally, about the same time that Fauci was doing his thing in 1984, that's also about the time that the vaccines got the exemption from lawsuits, because that's the other part of this equation.
That's why he was put. That's why he was put in place. He was put in place for the 86 Act. People think that he's a scientist. They think that he's clinical. The guy wouldn't know a patient if it bit him in the butt. The fact of the matter is, he was put in place as a henchman to let the pathogen injectors get their way. Listen, and I bring up the tobacco settlement for an important reason. The tobacco settlement required investigation. We actually had to go find the whodunit. You know, we had to dig through stuff. We had to get, whistleblowers, and we had to get inside documents, and we had to do all kinds of disclosures. Dan, this is not an investigation. All we have to do is charge the crime because they have already admitted to it. This is catching the bank robber on the steps of a bank with bags of money. And what we're doing right now is we're giving them cab fare to get away.
No, I think you're right on. You used the example of an automobile. It took 12 deaths from exploding gas tanks with Pintos before they took them off the market.
Yeah.
12 gas tanks, and they didn't even, that wasn't even proof positive that that was it.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. Now we have, the CDC even admits that the death rate from the COVID vaccines is underreported significantly. How many deaths really have occurred as a result of these vaccines? It's certainly in excess of the 10,000 that are actually being reported. And that ought to be enough to make everybody do somersaults trying to make this thing come before the courts.
Well, we've got a problem. And once again, this is where law enforcement doesn't read the law, which is a tiny problem. And I just had this problem down in Texas with Ken Paxton's office, where you're trying to teach lawyers what the law is, which is a tiny problem. But here's the problem. The problem is we have a situation where under the PrEP Act, the 2005 PrEP Act, there's a thing called the CICP. Now, you don't know about this, and you haven't heard about this because nobody conveniently talks about it. VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, is a requirement of the Childhood Immunization Program. That's part of the 1986 Act. And VAERS is only there to report childhood vaccination injuries. NIH, CDC, and the FDA have conveniently played a game. And the game they've played is they have played the game of distracting people into believing that VAERS is or isn't accurate. But here's the problem. There's a thing called the CICP, the Countermeasure Injury Compensation Program. That's what happens under the PrEP Act of 2005. That's a different reporting system. But here's where the problem happens, Dan. You know what you can't find? You can't find CICP data because that is held by, are you ready for this? By the manufacturers of the vaccines.
Wow.
Now,
talk about the fox and the hen house.
Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? You have Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson maintaining their own database on their own evidence of their own crimes that they are committing, and not a single public statement anywhere in the media, not a single public statement anywhere in alt media, not a single public statement anywhere where people are actually going, well, hold on a minute. Do you think there would be an adverse incentive if the manufacturer of a thing, which, by the way, by statute has immunity unless you can prove that they were engaging in a felony, which is the reason why I'm on this high horse, because they are engaging in a felony. Antitrust laws are felony violations. And the minute we actually get a single one of these organizations indicted for the felony, guess what happens? The emergency use authorization blows up, and the indemnity blows up, and the liability falls back on the manufacturer. I can guarantee you that tomorrow, if an attorney general brought a felony accusation against Anthony Fauci, Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, or AstraZeneca, those companies would pull their vaccines the day after. Because the companies will not engage in the liability that they are taking on right now, but for the immunity that they're given. And the minute we pull the diaphanous fig leaf veil of that immunity off of them, and all of a sudden their actual injuries and their actual deaths become reported, they will shut this thing down faster than you could say your name. The fact of the matter is, we have one step required. And by the way, the Department of Justice wrote a beautiful opinion in 2020, in the spring of 2020. There's an April opinion that says that the immunity shield goes away if a felony was committed. Guess what? This is a clear, convincing, and evidence-filled antitrust violation of the Sherman and the Clayton Act, all felony violations. This is Anthony Fauci lying to Congress, violating Section 1001 of the federal statute. That's a felony. There is the domestic terrorism, Section 802 of the Patriot Act. That's a felony. Every single one of these are felony violations, and all we need is one felony, and the entire liability shield falls away, and all of the injuries and all of the deaths are now the financial liability of the companies that are perpetrating this thing. And there is no question that if you want to end this madness, pull that immunity away, and the madness ends. But that takes a person of integrity and a person who understands that when they put their hand on the Bible to take their oath of office, they actually took an oath to uphold and defend the laws of both the states and the nation that they serve.
David, I think you've got exactly the right person here, Representative Brad Cheetah, to be in this conversation.